It's a mixed bag across the southeast as a normal midsummer for much of the southeast. And what I mean by that is we've had hot temperatures. We've had pop-up thunderstorms over much of the southeast, with some areas receiving some heavy rainfall and others receiving not so much and being a little below. Jeff will talk about what we have seen the last month. Chris will address the next couple of weeks which look somewhat wet in some parts. And I will look ahead to go from summer rain to autumn El Nino and what we are predicting going out to the end of the year in the July edition of the Water Resources Outlook.
Lots of rain this summer, and you see it here as we look at the past 30 days of observed precipitation, which, keep in mind, this data uses both National Weather Service radar data as well as an array of precipitation gauges from various networks to come up with these best estimates of precipitation. And we see here late June and July has been real wet for the Florida Peninsula. The pink color there indicating 10 plus inches, so we see many areas with 10 plus inches down there. Another little pocket there in North Alabama as well. The driest area you can see is in central North Carolina, where some areas have seen less than 2 inches over the past 30 days. And here we see how this compares to normal. Florida is in their convective wet season, so heavy rain is not out of the ordinary for this time of year, but still we see many of the scattered purple areas down there where rainfall is well above normal. The dry area we were talking about there in North Carolina shows up here as deficits of around 1 to 3 inches, so a bit behind for the last 30 days. Looking even further back, here we see precipitation departures from normal going back to the beginning of the year, and we see who is wet and who is not for the year, and a majority of the southeast is near normal, as you can see, or at least close to normal. We do have some wet spots there in the purple colors. That's in southern Appalachians and the Florida Peninsula, especially along the East Coast from Jacksonville to I-4, there where we see some 8 plus inches above normal areas. Coincidentally, that is the same area we see that the St. Johns River is having some minor flood issues currently. Let's take a look at some cities in the southeast, and we see they are, as far as precipitation, here is Birmingham, Alabama, and Mobile, Alabama. And we see Birmingham with a surplus since mid-April for the most part, and Mobile running with a slight deficit. Moving a bit west, we see Atlanta, Georgia, similar to Birmingham, with above normal precipitation since April, as we had that wet spring that also carried over into the summer. Tallahassee below there showing deficits until May, but they're back to about normal. Over to other parts of Florida, Jacksonville, Orlando, and Miami, all with a surge in rainfall amounts in May. That was with the record-breaking rainfall that month for the state, and that has helped keep surpluses at Jacksonville and Miami. Orlando continues to tread near normal. Looking at Roanoke and Charlotte, Roanoke with a surplus after that big rain event in May. Charlotte, North Carolina, has really run very close to normal since the beginning of the year. And finally, looking at Columbia and Charleston, South Carolina. Columbia looking at a bit of a deficit so far for the year, so they could use a little rain. Charleston had a surge of rainfall in May, and that has carried them a surplus, but getting closer to normal there. So how has this affected stream flow? As you would expect, most areas near normal. The exceptions is below normal there, stream flows there in the Piedmont of North Carolina and South Carolina, and above normal stream flows in the Florida Peninsula, with some above normal in the headwaters of the Alabama and Chattahoochee River systems. So as you would expect, no drought in the southeast and very little abnormal dryness. Will the wet weather continue in the short term and long term? Chris and Todd will fill you in.
We're beginning the period with a stationary front across the region. As we go into this weekend, the front will lift as a warm front in response to another low-pressure system pushing eastward. And by Sunday, the cold front associated with the low will be moving into the southeast. This front is expected to become a stationary front, and it will be the focus for rainfall during the early portion of the work week. Models are showing a continued active pattern, with another front coming in later in the week. The 7-day precipitation forecast reflects the active pattern, with contributions from both the short-term and mid-term periods shown in this image. The long-term outlook is for above normal precipitation amounts, with models continuing to show an active weather pattern across the southeast.
Here is the look at our ENSO conditions as we approach fall, and maybe give us an idea of what we can expect for rainfall and how it's going to affect our rivers in the coming months. Models are indicating warming of the equatorial sea surface temperatures as we enter fall and into the winter. This makes the chances for La Nina almost zero, and a very good chance of passing through neutral conditions fairly quickly, and a 70 to 80% chance of El Nino conditions by the time we get to winter. An El Nino winter in the southeast is often wet. So what can we expect in the fall as we transition to an El Nino for our rivers? Jeff has done some excellent research on how rivers across the country are affected by El Nino conditions. I'm going to focus on the southeast for the months of September through December. September shows equal chances of above, below, and near normal stream flows in the southeast, with a hint of dryness or lower stream flows along the Carolina and Virginia Appalachian Range. October shows higher than normal stream flows through different areas, including Alabama, Mississippi, Georgia, and parts of Florida. Equal chances through most of the rest of the southeast. November is very similar to October, except that areas of chances of above normal stream flows expand, and the chance for below normal stream flows is far less. December expands that high stream flow trend through the rest of the southeast and all along the coast and as far as Texas. With that in mind, let's see what the Climate Prediction Center is showing for August through January. So here's what CP thinks will happen in the southeast for August. Warm. Now, this has been a running theme in all of these outlooks recently, and I believe will continue to be a theme in our foreseeable future. We continue to be above normal 30-year average from 1980 through 2010. With respect to precipitation, it seems that we will have a continuation of wet weather along the Carolina and Virginia coast from now through the end of August. Chris suggested a wet period through the end of July, and CPC is leaning towards wet weather in that area also as we move into August. The seasonal forecast from August through October looks very similar, with warm weather and wet along the Carolina coast, even with that area of wet weather dipping into Florida. Often, the fall is either feast or famine when it comes to precipitation. We either get a lot or very little. At this time, the weather does not look dry though, and with the developing El Nino, I would lean more towards the wet side. And this might even be without a significant number of tropical systems affecting the southeast. As I've said before though, all it takes is one slow-moving storm to throw a wrench into it all. Be prepared in the southeast, regardless of the forecast. Our winter precipitation forecast looks wet. This is exactly what we would expect in our forecast with a high probability of El Nino and a forecast that is that far into the future. This forecast is looking at the November through January time frame, but the wetness would likely continue through the rest of the winter. And so the bottom line, in the short term, it looks like above normal rainfall possible for Virginia and the Carolinas, at least for the next few weeks and possibly into August. And the tropics are continuing to be quiet, at least for the time being. Now we're heading into our peak hurricane season as we get into middle of August through September, but for right now it does look a little bit quiet. As for the long term, the tropical season, as we mentioned last month, may be a little quieter than originally forecast for a variety of reasons. Part of it's El Nino, part of it's cooler waters out in the Atlantic, but still a potential for an active mid to late fall that's not associated with the tropics. So we could see some rainfall and some flooding at that time that's not necessarily associated with the tropics. We'll have to see, because we will be doing our next water resources outlook where we'll start addressing that as we're ramping up for hurricane season, and we'll do that on August 16th. You have a good rest of your most of your meteorological summer, and we will see you in August.